right, so maybe just very quickly down the line, Nouriel, we've heard from you, we know who you are,
Yep.
but the three of you perhaps just introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Riccardo Spagni. You may know me as Fluffy Pony. If you don't know me as Fluffy Pony, follow me on Twitter, that's my handle. I have worked on Monero for the past 5 years. I've been involved with Bitcoin since early 2011. And I'm currently working on a project called Tari, which is a decentralized assets protocol built on top of Monero.
Great. Brittany?
Hi guys, I'm Brittany Kaiser. I am the co-founder of DATA, the Digital Asset Trade Association. We're a Wyoming 501c6 that works on blockchain and digital asset legislation and regulation, mostly in the United States, but also everything went so well in Wyoming, we also help a lot of other countries and US states in implementing that legislation. I'm also the co-founder of the Own Your Data Foundation, where we do digital literacy training. So yeah, thank you very much.
Great. And we have apparently a quota on Kaisers in this panel. So Nathan Kaiser, tell us a little about yourself, please.
Second Kaiser, and so I'm the chairperson of the Cardano Foundation. I'm also the general counsel of IOHK, which is behind the Cardano protocol. I'm also at the Berkeley Klein Center at Harvard looking at data and privacy. Yeah. Good to be here.
All right. So let's just set the stage a little bit. I think, Brittany, maybe you would be the right place to start here. You would know the Cambridge Analytica story, right? To me, that was a really compelling moment. As a journalist, I've looked at the way that the media has been sort of co-opted by Facebook and seen concerns about that, but things like the Cambridge Analytica story that have really exposed the way in which our privacy is challenged here, right? And this is a conversation about money, but at the same time, this intrinsic challenge that we face in the current centralized data management systems of these siloed internet behemoths clearly is a problem. Why don't you break that down a little bit for us?
Absolutely. So I think the way that we talk about privacy and about blockchain in a seamless way is that we're talking about digital assets. And the blockchain space makes it a lot more tangible in a way for people, because when you take data sets and you tokenize them, it's a lot easier to understand why it's an asset, right? A lot of people don't think about protecting their data because they don't think of it as valuable. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you don't trade it in a normal way unless you're working for a company like Cambridge Analytica or Experian or Equifax. But we need to understand the value. For so long, we have been the producers of what is now the world's most valuable asset class, yet we have been given zero rights to the assets that we are producing every moment, every day. And it's up to companies or governments to collect our assets, and then they own the entirety of that value. That's not fractionalized, where we have some sort of rights to where that goes. Until recently, obviously with GDPR coming into enactment May 25th of 2018, now the California Consumer Privacy Act, we are getting into a space where the privacy conversation is relying more on consumer protection. So GDPR and also CCPA are saying, because you are a consumer, you should have rights to transparency over what's collected on you and have the right to opt out or the right to delete. I don't think that that's the only way we should be having this conversation, because I really like to think of my data, like my assets, and even my tokenized data, very well encrypted blocks of data that are valuable blockchain tokens that we care so much about. I want rights to that, like I have rights to any of my other property. And this is an example I really like to give, that I think of the future of privacy as a way for us to enforce our privacy in court. So if our privacy is violated, we can take someone to court and we can win. Just like if someone breaks into your house or damages your other property. So I'd like to use the Airbnb model as an example. If someone wants to use our data, just like they want to use your house on Airbnb, they tell you who they are, what they want to use it for, how long they're going to use it, and you agree on a price before you hand away the keys. And that's where I think a lot of distributed ledger options, especially if we're talking about advanced forms of smart contracting, are ways that we are going to be able to prove where our data is going and prove that people no longer have access to our data when we have opted out.
Great. Well, let's shift it to you then, Riccardo. You built a protocol, because obviously the recognition was that Bitcoin itself, really, because of the pseudonymous structure of it, doesn't actually give you the kind of privacy that you want. So you build added layers of privacy into Monero. Just a tiny little bit about how, a little bit, too much weeds, but also give us the why. Why is it so important in your mind that digital currencies, which in many respects are thought of as an anonymous process, actually end up being, sometimes not? How do we fit in? Why it's important to bring the privacy into it?
Cool. So just very briefly, 5 aspects of privacy that Monero focuses on are hiding where a transaction is going to. So someone looking at a block explorer can't see the address being paid. Hiding where a transaction is coming from, so they can't see who's paying the person or the company, whatever. Hiding the transaction amount, so you don't know how much is being transacted. Hiding the originating IP address of that transaction. And lastly, maximizing the privacy set through default privacy, so that you get lost in the crowd, because if it's only a crowd of 5 people, you're not getting lost in anything. The why is obviously something that a lot of people who work on privacy enhancing projects like Monero, like Tor, like Firefox, like Apple, all of these projects that have started embracing, they started embracing privacy or have got privacy enhancing roots. The why is very clear, and it's because we're sitting in 2020, and we've basically created George Orwell's 1984. The difference is, in 1984, George Orwell imagined this world where governments stuck surveillance devices into our home, and that what a terrible world that would be. And instead, what we did is we stuck surveillance devices into our home, just so we can say, "Hey Alexa" and "Hey Siri." Now, that's not a fantastic environment to be in, and as Brittany so clearly pointed out, we've lost control of our data. And we've lost control of our financial data too. There was a study done through an excellent privacy researcher in Europe that through GDPR was able to get PayPal to reveal the organizations that they share the information with in Europe. And when you make a payment through PayPal, your information about that payment and much of your personal information is shared with over 600 organizations. Some of which pay for your data, some of which PayPal give it to them for free. So Monero is really a project that tries to take back control of that financial data, so no one can see who you're transacting with, or why you're transacting with them, or how much you're transacting, unless you opt into giving them that information.
Now, the folks at Zcash, which you could see as a competitor to Monero, I sometimes like the way Zuko. Everybody in the space has got wacky names. Fluffy, Zuko, I take each other seriously. Zuko often talks about the need to ensure the fungibility of money, and that privacy is an integral part of that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that, along with the notion of human rights, which is kind of what you guys are talking about, like also a fundamental piece of how a free market works, right? You don't have free will. How are you actually going to have a market, right? So there's this sort of core, underpinnings in some respects of the existing financial system that, in many respects, digital currencies, if they are not built with these sorts of protocols beneath it, they're going to destroy, right? So that the fungibility of money itself may be a threat if, in fact, we have a trail, and each coin now has a history that can speak to the risks associated with owning that, right? So no longer does it become a one-for-one exchange. So I've been thinking really about how I'm going to get into this conversation. I thought maybe that might be an entry point for you. So clearly, cash has played this critical role through history. You've obviously done a lot of thinking about that. And there's a bit of a movement around the world to get rid of cash. Ken Rogoff, who you know well, is advocating that we do so. What do you stand on? Because in some respects, weirdly, if you're pro-cash, you're kind of actually on the same side as that very fluffy thing. Because it's all about, one advantage of cash, of course, is that anonymity and the power of it comes from the fact that it is a free exchange. Your thoughts?
My view is cash is going to disappear around the world. Already in Sweden, China is gone. Poland's a plan for doing a cashless society, so the trend is downward, and so on. Paper cash gives you some anonymity. As I pointed out, if you're going to have central bank digital currencies, they're not going to be based on blockchain and so on. There are ways of actually, if you have a central bank digital currency, to have some degree of privacy. That is, transactions are anonymous unless a legitimate law enforcement authority has the right to see a transaction. Even today, my private bank transaction, if the tax authority wants to audit me, I have to provide that information. So it doesn't matter whether it's the government or the bank that has those transactions or a private bank. Under some condition, you can have rules that things are private until they have to be public because of law enforcement. So that's the point. Secondly, I was at the lunch today with Steve Mnuchin, the US Secretary of the Treasury, and he's not a communist or a socialist, big capitalist, and he says crypto cannot become the next Swiss bank account, where essentially any tax evader, any criminal, any terrorist, any trafficker can essentially do transactions. We have, for good reasons, all over the world, every country, rules against terrorism, against tax evasion, against trafficking. That's why we have MAL, that's why we have KYC. And therefore, this idea, you're going to create something that's going to be totally anonymous and private, and that's the freedom of people. My freedom is limited by the fact that I cannot do things that are criminal. The idea that I'm absolutely free is just a joke. That's why even capitalists like Steve Mnuchin know that, and that's why we have MAL KYC. That's why they went against Libra, because in Libra, Facebook, 2 billion accounts, anybody can have a fake name. If you fake name, you can transfer money from here to some kind of offshore financial center. That's going to be illegal. So we have these rules, and there's a good reason why we have these rules. So this point about having privacy, yeah, I like privacy, but I don't want to be in a situation in which issues of privacy, issues of digital identity, issue of data ownership, all these problems can be resolved in a framework that is not blockchain, that is not crypto. We have a problem with the fact we don't own the data, and Apple or Google or Amazon are worth $1 trillion because they own the data. Fine, there are private solutions today, apps that allow you to own the data and sell them to Google or to Facebook, or sometimes the government is going to do it. There are governments today that are thinking about having digital identity, because in a world in which everything is digital, there's digital identity. There are some private solutions, there are some government solutions, they have nothing to do with blockchain. So there is a problem, but the idea that the solution is based on decentralized blockchain, where, by the way, who's going to authenticate this stuff? Some miner that is based in Belarus or Russia or in China or in other criminal country where there is no democracy. I want my data to be verified, my digital identity verified by China or Belarus or Russia. That's stupid. It's crazy. I'd rather have the U.S. government having the central bank, the federal.
Nouriel, please. That was fun.
That was fun.
Serious.
No.
The topic of this panel is not actually, is blockchain a great thing or a bad thing? That's not the topic here. The topic here is privacy and money, and the role of privacy and money. And yes, it relates to blockchain, it relates to crypto, because these questions, this is what I'm going to throw to you right now, Nathan. These questions are critical for people who, whether you like it or not, are building these things. And they need to figure out how to be compliant with regulations and at the same time ensure that privacy. Because to Brittany's point, I mean, it's not just about governments that are surveilling you. It is about a panopticon of the corporate model itself, the surveillance capitalism system. So privacy is a problem that goes beyond whether or not you can throw regulations on it. Nonetheless, Nathan, you are in this space trying to figure out how you interface with regulations. Tell us a little bit about your interest from the Cardano side and things like the travel rule and FATF and things like that.
Well, that'd be much too boring. And I think all of us were afraid this was going to be a boring panel. And I was going to help on that one. But so basically what you said, Nouriel, was very interesting, was a great story, but it just wasn't true. No. So you said, like, oh, we got regulations all over the world and nice governments. It's just not true. It sounds very nice. It's a dream world, it's fairy tale. So that's exactly why we need privacy, because the companies are not nice, the governments are not nice. In Switzerland, the government is relatively nice, and in Italy as well. And in the US, reasonably nice, but then it goes downhill from there, no? It's all relative, no? And so what we need is privacy, exactly because the regulatory environment works here and there, and maybe on Mondays, but not on Sundays. And that's why we need privacy. But please, yeah.
I tend to agree, and I think one thing that I'd like to add to that is if you have a government, even a really good government like Switzerland, who has your data, and you trust them, and you have a great relationship with them, you trust the US, you trust Italy, you trust whoever, what's to stop a hacker from stealing your data? What's to stop someone who works in a government department from leaking that data? Clearly, in the past, and we've seen plenty of evidence of this, organizations, whether they are corporations or governments, are very bad at managing other people's data. And that's really, it's not about whether the government's good or bad, whether the organization is good or bad. The reality is your data is slippery. There's a famous cryptography quote, and that is, data wants to be free. And all we're trying to do is just, bottle it up a little bit.
So let private agents or government agents in Belarus, Russia, or China authenticating my data, my digital information, and whatever not. I prefer the US government, not just the US government. The reality is in 80% of the world, you have governments that are reasonably credible, they're democracy, they're trusted, inflation is low, you have central banks, you have institutions exist, they're centralized, but we do tons of transactions all over the world, all the time, because there are some trusted institutions been around forever. And if you don't like them, there is democracy, there is revolution, there is change. So you have to trust somebody, and I'd rather trust our own government or even private companies that are trusted than somebody somewhere out there in Belarus that I don't know who's going to do with my data. And by the way, speaking about hacking, come on, you have more hacking anything in crypto than anywhere under the sun. It's a joke, really. Any centralized exchange has been hacked 99% of the time. Of course. About safety and security, there's no security in crypto.
So yes, so
I lose my key or some of these fields. It's gone for good.
Monero's always going to happen. Every lecture Tuesday, I think. Anyway, so and Nathan, I still wanted to jump in there, but I just wanted to put another level set here. You know, Nouriel, you were talking about the governments. You have a role of governments checking on things. That is an important way to remove criminals from the process, and thanks to KYC and AML, you know, we don't have apparently a lot of money laundering going on in the world at all because the system works perfectly well to protect it. Really well. I think the fact that there's what 6 trillion, I think is the UN's estimate. I mean, it doesn't work for one. That's one point. But I think the other point that even if it does, I think the point that I find quite disturbing about the debate about AML and KYC. Not to say it shouldn't exist. I'm not an advocate for anarchy, but at the same time, is to recognise when we design these systems the downside, the trade-off, and the trade-off is the fact that unlike the US government, which you may or may not love to work with, there are hundreds of governments around the world who not only are not acting in good faith, but even worse than that, are incapable of establishing the kind of identification that is required to comply with KYC. So there are developing countries all over the world that are consistently being de-risked because of the increasing compliance requirements placed on the banks that run our global system. So we impose KYC AML and we pay the price for 2 billion people removed from this process. This isn't an advocacy for crypto. I'm not here claiming for blockchain. I'm just saying that KYC AML has a downside. Now, I think you're probably going to want to respond, but Nathan, I'd like you to weigh in first, simply because, you know, again, you're in this space thinking about how do we get that balance right.
Well, I think there's actually, you talked about downsides of KYC and AML. There's 2 separate downsides. One is, what if it works? No. And if it all totally works, there's a downside with the fact that not everybody can move to the US. I appreciate that you say you want to trust the US government. It's kind of hard to move everybody else there. It's kind of hard to tell everybody just to have a revolution because that costs life. Nobody is going to call for that. And the other thing is, what if it doesn't work? And that's the real truth. It don't work. No, it actually doesn't work. So we don't even have to talk about the fact that there's a downside of a working KYC AML system because it doesn't work. So we don't even have to start. No, and so that's where it comes in. In a system that doesn't work, you need some safety belts. It's like a car. No, if you're going to have an accident sooner or later. So that's why I need a safety belt. And here, privacy is the ultimate safety belt, and you want to have your own safety belt. You can't just say you have to go somewhere else, live in a country where they don't have cars, then you don't need a safety belt.
I would like to add a little bit to that as well, which is saying, although I love working with the U.S. government on digital asset legislation, the U.S. government has been the worst government in the entire world to deal with the digital asset industry, not just with blockchain and distributed ledger, but with data. And also, unfortunately, it's my government too, but they have a history of lying to their people and lying to everybody else. So I wouldn't really trust them to authenticate anything unless they were on a trustless system where I know exactly how those protocols are making their decisions, because a centralized database, all of that data can still be manipulated. Trust me, I was in the middle of the biggest data crisis in the world because my former employer told Facebook that they deleted a data set that Facebook never came to actually figure out whether they did or not, right? And how would they have proven that? Facebook could have possibly sent over 40,000 companies that were part of their developer program to have all of those databases forensically examined when they ended their Friends API system. Well, they didn't do that, and guess what? Nobody does that. Under GDPR and CCPA, if I have the right to delete, I can't send somebody to a government department or to a company to see if they've actually deleted my data set. I need something where I have real provable tracking and traceability that cannot be deleted and cannot be manipulated, and that being controlled by a government is not the solution.
Yeah.
So I have to run, but I run to another panel. So I'm quite generous to Nouriel, who bygone, I suppose, and give you something that I'm sure you were looking for, which is the last word. Please make it a relatively short one. Continue to get into it.
Well, the current system of AML KYC is not perfect, but the OECD countries that advance the economies emerging market decided to crack down against terrorist financing, trafficking, tax evasion. They went after offshore financial centers. They went after Switzerland, just to be case everybody in Europe could bring their money, put an account secret. It's not there anymore. It's not a perfect system. A system that works. Before, initially, people in this space were saying, absolute freedom. Why should I have any ML, any KYC, 100% privacy? Now people say, wait, there are terrorists, there are criminals, there are lots of things. Okay, we're going to do it how? There are solutions, first of all, that are government related. Many governments in the world can be trusted, first of all. They're not perfect, but can be trusted. Most of the world is still a democracy. Secondly, there are also some private solutions. As I said, in Sweden, there is a system of digital identities private. Now they want to offer also a government solution, so the alternative. Both of them are not based on anything decentralized. Once you go to decentralized, things can be stolen even in a decentralized system. And the question is, who are these decentralized authors and can you trust them? And the reality is that in this world, most of the mining is done in jurisdictions where there is no rule of law, where there's a government that are totally criminal or they're totally undemocratic, and there are a bunch of agents, private, they can be more crooks and criminal than those that are doing the terrorism.
Right,
so
right,
how can I
that's
trust these people?
Yeah.
So the solutions have to be found, and let's not believe that everything decentralized is going to be fine, because it's not going to be fine.
All right, thank you. Last word from Nouriel. Round of applause to the panel, everybody.
All right.